Hi, everybody.
This
Oh my
is
God, thank you
Matt.
for coming.
We've been talking about our anxiety. We've been talking about scarcity, Book Friday.
Cool, great, Matt, we're so happy you're here. We'll sort of now formally start the event. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Yes, thank you. You were a great moderator.
Yes.
Impressive.
Thanks, thank you. It was my pleasure. You guys are great. We're so happy you're here. I'll turn it over.
Hi, friend. My new best friend. We're going to ECAR on March 15th together, right?
I do.
Yes.
Oh, yes, we
Wow.
are. Yeah, we are on the 15th.
The
Let's go.
15th, yeah.
It's on the 15th.
I'm doing an event there with Rabbi Browse.
Cool. See you then.
It's a book talk. How are you?
I'm okay.
Are you?
I'm good. Yeah.
We were you're gonna have a panic attack about Big Party.
No, this stuff doesn't give me panic. This stuff,
Awesome.
I'm like completely lucid when shit hits the fan. But
So is this better for you to have the thrill of needing to be?
No,
No
it's
crazy
embarrassing.
process.
It's embarrassing. So like, one of the things that there are some things that I'm good at and other things that I'm not good at. And one of the things I'm not good at is planning.
Really? I feel like this is actually true. I randomly know many people who do live television. I happen to know like a pretty wide subset, and I would say that you guys are all generally tardy and cat-like. And so it's interesting to me. So I'm like, how does this
What
work?
do you mean cat-like?
Oh, like Jessica Yellen, for example, invariably 25 minutes late. You know where I'm
She
like,
actually looks a little feline too.
yeah, but where there's a lot of herding. And I'm like, how did you do this where you were needed to be on at 8:04 a.m., but you managed?
It's because we're better in crisis than in times of calm, which is what this book is kind of about.
Yeah.
Is that in some ways it's easier to function in crisis than in times of calm. And societies and humans evolved for us to be this way, right? There's some people who are better at being in a calm space, and there are some people who need to go out there and handle the crisis, and they're not necessarily overlapping skills.
It's interesting. It's like the overfunctioners versus the underfunctioners, and when that's like a Brene concept, but some people really rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I don't know if it's over under. It's just excelling. Like I imagine, even though I'm small, I would imagine myself as being the person who would go and hunt the woolly mammoth. Like I want the spear. I want to go out there into the ravine where we're driving the mammoths, and I'm going to be there prodding at the mammoth with the tip of a spear, or tasting, the mushrooms. Like, oh, delicious, or am I going to trip, or am I going to die? I imagine that that's what I would be, which is not necessarily useful for a society. Sometimes you become very expendable in that way because you die. No, and I mean that very seriously. So like those people are useful, but not all the time. So I don't know, overfunction or underfunction is just different function. But okay, so everybody who's here and who's still here, thank you.
No, we're not. She kept us very
Well,
entertained.
then why would you leave? She's the primary attraction. But I do have a question, and I tend to ask audiences this. Has anybody experienced the panic attack before? Because we talk about panic, but has anybody actually had one?
I might have.
Okay.
Well, you would know.
Maybe describe it.
Well, I've hyperventilated and I was able to calm myself down.
Yeah.
So, that's happened a couple of times.
Yeah.
They're too hard.
It's interesting, like being present with you through your whole book experience and not knowing that I was with you at times during your writing of the books, the podcast, and whatnot. In the follow-up of this book being out, have you heard from anyone who has any interesting theories? Like, it's interesting thinking of you talking about being the person who would hunt the woolly mammoth. Do you feel like some of us are built structurally with different types of nervous systems to serve different functions in our culture, and that it sort of doesn't apply anymore, but it's like the long coattails of who we were originally?
Yeah, I found a lot of solace. Actually, one of the first sources of solace for me was evolutionary biology and psychology. Because I don't know if anybody's read the book, but one of my central questions is, after I made this catastrophic mistake covering the helicopter crash that killed Kobe Bryant, was which anybody, many people have probably experienced for different reasons, but mine was, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I broken? And if I'm broken in this very specific way, are other people broken in this specific way? Am I alone? And we're pretty advanced along, I mean, in terms of species, we're pretty new, right? Haven't been along that many years, a couple million years really. But that's still thousands of generations, right? Like, how is this thing that is so obviously unhealthy and bad for us, and in addition to being unpleasant, probably just bad for the species, like, how does this persist in the human genome, and why am I afflicted with it? And so I sought out all these evolutionary biologists and psychologists and tried to figure it out. And what I learned is that it's probably there for a reason, right? There's something that's called an evolutionary bottleneck, which is every once in a period of time, it could be 100 years or 1,000 years, there happens to be this cataclysm. It could be a drought, and if you're a gazelle with a particular kind of kidney that causes you kidney stones and discomfort, you're gonna be prancing around the prairie, passing kidney stones, which is really not comfortable. But there's gonna be this mega drought, and you're gonna have the kidneys that are gonna get you through, and then your genes are passed along. And maybe there's something like that with humans, that people who are a little bit more skittish, a little bit more prone to panic or anxiety, would start to think, let's leave Germany now. It's 1933, and this guy with the mustache, I got a bad feeling. I'm going to sell everything. People call me panicking, but no, I don't feel right. So that actually preserves part of this genetic code. And another psychiatrist, Randy Nesse, who I love, really super calmed me down. This was in the beginning again of the research in the book, and he said panic is perfectly normal. He said your brain is wired for you to have 1,000 false alarms, which is a panic attack, rather than a missed alarm. You miss an alarm, you're dead. So yeah, you're totally primed to have panic, which is false. Your body's alerting you to something that bad might happen, but you're not going to die. The worst thing that happens is you burn 50 calories running around with your head cut off like a chicken. But your body survives. So your brain's okay with that. But yeah, so that's.
But it's what makes your story so remarkable too, is the fact that you're not like a corporate attorney who is occasionally having a panic attack in the subway, right? You're in the tunnels with the IDF, you're in Gaza, you're constantly in the middle of these major threat situations, and you're fine, but when it's time to roll the tape in the morning.
So I think it's a really interesting point you bring up, right?
Yeah.
And that's where culture does come in. And this is the culture of perfection, right? So there's the one thing, which is how we're wired. And I am wired to be a little bit more anxious than most or many. And probably predisposed to having panic attacks. But I've also been informed culturally in this sickness of perfection, right? You gotta be perfect, you gotta be just perfect. And that's where the culture.
I can't relate.
I know, and that's where the culture actually sinks in and has its effect. And so there's this, I have this expectation of myself, and I feel that others have expectations of me of perfection, and so I can't meet that. I am just too frail and too human to be able to handle that, so I freeze. Whereas if I'm in Gaza and we're being shot at and you hear the boom of the bullets ricocheting right around me, there was no expectation of perfection. How could you be flawless when the shit's hitting the fan? So I'm
So
just
insane.
totally frictionlessly flowing through the situation.
And do you feel like that? I mean, that's wild to me because I feel both. I would not feel comfortable being shot at, and I also want to be perfect. But do people say your bravery or your lack of anxiety in that situation is unusual?
It's a little unusual.
I mean, it seems very unusual. So I'm wondering, it's just interesting.
And that's why I call it the paradox of the courageous coward. It's I think of myself as being a coward, but I'm also very courageous in other situations where people would think that it's courageous. I don't find it So just the mode in which I operate. That's you're like that too. Because I've seen you ride horses,
Yeah.
and that's crazy down there. Like she's galloping in the mountains of Montana, and like you fall down, and you hit a rocky bed.
Yeah. Well, I did break my neck.
Right, and
Fun. Fun. Feelings internalized, not expressed.
Can I just sorry. So you've experienced.
Yeah. No. Do it. Let's do it. We're all best friends.
You've
now.
experienced a panic attack, right?
Yeah.
What was it like?
I thought I was gonna die, the kind of tunnel vision, like sort of a sense of dissociation, like with my body, and just like my heart rate going insane, and kind of feeling palpitations, like nothing feels right, and all you can think is like, I'm gonna die right now, and I can't like formulate thoughts of how to avoid that,
You formulated that very well. I was like, that's perfect. Did it happen once? You can come in.
Happened a couple times. Definitely like during the pandemic, it definitely had a couple times where, sort of like out of nowhere, almost like it didn't feel provoked. It just sort of, I guess like looking back, there's like a buildup of things that, you kind of keep pushing off or pushing to the side, and then it sort of manifests all at once.
I think that's the scariest kind. And many people have them in the middle of the night.
Oh,
These
really?
night terrors, yeah, and especially men. They'll wake up in the middle of the night in a complete panic, and it's terrifying because you're in the dark, and if you're frozen in their bodies, I don't know if it's happened to you.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that actually gets people hooked on sleeping medication.
So why is that? Did you see anything in your research of why? Because like if there's one time and then I'm terrified, like if I wake up on the times that I've come the closest to a panic attack, it has been in the middle of the night, and it hasn't been necessarily during a really stressful time either. So I was just wondering, did you find any the reason why that is?
I will admit, because that particular thing didn't afflict me, I never really looked into it too deeply. It's just more of encountering it, especially among men, but obviously women too. But that night terror thing is something that is definitely prevalent. But I don't know why specifically at night. Do you have any ideas?
I don't, but I
Does it have to
think
do with the dream world?
Yeah,
The dream?
subconscious.
possibly. I think it could have like breathing. There could be something happening like with people not breathing and like CO2.
Suffocation, fear of suffocation, which is one of the fears that causes panic the most, because again, this is we're genetically primed to panic during anything that might simulate suffocation, which is why one of the reasons they measure, one of the methods they use to measure someone's level of panic is by giving you carbon dioxide in addition to oxygen. So you're actually not being suffocated, but your body gets the message that its CO2 levels are high and then rings the panic alarm. So that's a really interesting theory.
No, for me with my hyperventilation disorder, a lot of it is I just have disordered breathing, and it sets off a whole range of symptoms. But what I loved about your book too is, I know it's satisfying as you want to get to the end of the book and be like, he figured it out. The thing about panic and anxiety, to the point of these night terrors, and I'm sure many of you guys who experience anxiety and panic can relate, there's not always a clear causation, right? Like you're misfiring. It's a misfire to me, because like whenever I get into a hyperventilation pattern, there's some triggers like sleep deprivation or maybe too much caffeine, but it's not like I can peg it to the most stressful or exciting events in my life. It's not, there's no formula for me.
And you're aware, and obviously hyperventilation, we think we're taking in more air, but what we're actually doing is depriving our system of oxygen.
No, we have too much oxygen, but we think we don't have enough oxygen.
No, sorry.
Oh.
So carbon dioxide is essential for your body to break down oxygen. And when you overload your body with O2, it loses the capacity to actually ingest oxygen.
Yeah.
So that's why they give you a paper bag, so you're breathing in more carbon dioxide, which balances it out. that's the crazy thing. So we're like, I'm getting all this oxygen. No, you're actually depriving yourself, which is why in holotropic breath work, anybody ever done breath work, like serious like holotropic breath work, the heavy breathing one? So you're basically doing, it's one of the methods that I found most healing, and it is the closest thing to a psychedelic journey you can do without ingesting anything. So you basically go into a hyperventilative state, and what happens is you curl up, all because your extremities are deprived of oxygen, because all of this stuff is going to your core to preserve you. So you go like this, and you start, that's why they talk about lobster claws, and everybody curls up, and then you're basically like hallucinating. So I started tripping, and then I started crying hysterically during my first time. I had no idea what was happening. And it was one of the most cathartic experiences.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of hyperventilation
That's
we're
the
trying to get into, not
not
something that's happening out of
not the
anxiety.
chronic, like yawning, ongoing, exhausting variety. Have you done any more psychedelic journeys?
I have.
Oh, look at you!
I had. Has anybody tried psychedelics? No?
Yes, yeah.
So
Yes, back there.
there's some psychedelic extravaganzas in this book.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say they're on the table.
No.
I swear.
It's part of the
Maybe the
journey.
Potter.
Wait, what have you done? Tell us what happened. Did you figure it out?
So I've been meaning to have a psychedelic journey for a while, and just sort of, it's good to go back to the places that you've been in these journeys, and it's hard to afford as adults, parents with young children, young-ish. It's hard to afford yourself the time and the space that you need, because you need privacy, and set and setting are critical. We're just getting into the psychedelic trip, so come on in. It's going to be the best part. And so I had a hard time like finding the time. Anyway, last Wednesday, I was like, today's the day. I had all this stuff going on. I had a 12-minute piece going that night, but I'm like, I'm going to afford myself 4 or 5 hours to just do whatever comes. I'm going to do it. And I took 4 grams of psychedelic mushrooms, and which is not a huge dose. It's not a huge dose. No. Like,
That's more than those little gummies.
Yes, it's more than that. So 3.5 is considered a very solid psychedelic dose. Any 5.5 grams is more like a hero dose, and anything above is like the God dose, right? So that's when you're gone. But so I took it, and I'm like running around. I've got stuff to do, and it's just me and the dogs in the house, and the gardeners are outside. Oh God, the lawnmowers and the leaf blowers. But I lie down on the couch and I try to set up some music, and pretty quickly it starts to take hold. And I had the trip I've been hoping for years. I felt the most pure, absolute, euphoric, non-sexual, orgasmic pleasure I have ever experienced. And I'm lying there on the couch like this.
Somebody should say, oh, it's live stream.
It was amazing. And I'm seeing these psychedelic structures in my mind's eye. And I realized that I am seeing the perfection of beauty. And for the first time, I was able to connect this physical beauty that I was able to see with the divine and God, and I never have any God experiences. And I just had this divine experience, and it lasted for a couple hours until I started thinking about picking my kid up from school because my wife was away for the week, and like normal thoughts intruded, and hunger and all that stuff, which is totally normal. And I experienced the greatest gratitude. I was so grateful for this experience of seeing this, feeling the pleasure and seeing these things and beholding divinity, and then you can't really grasp it. It's so slippery. It goes away so quickly. But I was so grateful for it, and I've been experiencing, this gratitude since then. So it was a perfect top off and a wonderful experience.
Oh, and just by yourself, no guide.
No.
Yeah.
So throughout the book, I do a lot of different psychedelic experiences, and all of them are done with a psychedelic guide, which is not cheap. But I think, especially for a first journal, it's definitely useful.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. It sounds like that was an amazing experience.
The best experience of my life.
Yeah,
I was
so-
given the greatest gift.
Yeah, and I know that when you
Sorry
were
to your
on,
kids.
at least
What?
Sorry to your kids.
Yeah, I know. No, I was on time. That's one thing I never miss.
you described a psychedelic experience on Elise's podcast, and it was hilarious. It was, maybe not ever want to try it again, but it
Ayahuasca,
sounds
yeah.
like this is an amazing experience.
That had me pooping myself for 10 days with ayahuasca, just the polar opposite.
Like, how do you prevent yourself from wanting to chase after that? Like, how do you? Because obviously that's an amazing experience, and it's more than sugar. It's it's how you.
Euphoria, yeah. it's a good
How do
question.
you not want to replicate that over and over and chase after that? I guess you could say, because from my understanding, I don't know anything about psychedelics, but it's not always something you can control.
So most psychedelics are not at all addictive. I would say that ketamine probably has some addictive qualities to it. People have gotten addicted to ketamine. It's also the most purely euphoric in terms of the sensation. You ever done ketamine?
I have.
Of getting into it, it feels really, really good.
Interesting. I did not enjoy it, but it's
Oh,
a fascinating
I loved it.
experience.
Yeah. I think, again, time setting is critical, and you can't just take a fistful of mushrooms every day. But also, I felt so much gratitude for that experience. I almost never want to do it again because it was so good. I don't want anything to
Can ever get
mar.
better.
Yeah, mar that it was just. And in our world, it's hard to feel that kind of perfection because nothing's ever quite good enough because you always have the paradigm of something that might be better, right? With social media, it all looks so good out there. All the other offerings have to be better than what we have. But I experienced something that to me was the absolute perfection. So I don't know, I couldn't imagine it being any better than what I had, and I'm so grateful for it. And that unadulterated, pure gratitude is also something that makes me really happy. So it's a great question, but I see both sides of that. I'm sure I'll do it again at some point because it wears off. But right now, I'm just so grateful for it and still basking in the glow. And there is a tail, just like journeys that lasts a little bit of time.
I was just going to ask, do you share this with your kids? Do you, because we're so, my kids are grown now, but, always like hiding the things that we did as young people. Oh no, I never did that, and so do you share this with your family?
I share with my wife. I think my daughter knows that I've done psychedelics. I'm not quite sure she knows what it means. My son doesn't know. He's not.
Yeah.
He's 9, so he wouldn't know. But I will.
Yeah.
And I will encourage them to do it in a very protected
way. My oldest knows only because there's a chocolate bar on the top of the fridge that says "Do not eat."
Come on. Hold on.
Hold on.
You know that a "do not eat" sign means try me.
Yeah, he's not interested, but he knows why.
Okay.
He's not interested. I know.
And it's funny how our kids grow up to be very different. My kids are not adventurous.
Yeah.
Wow.
They are not adventurous. They can't understand why anybody would do the work that I do. They hate the travel. They hate that I'm away. They are not interested in being shot at or being scared to death by something. They want a normal life.
That is what is so confusing to me about the book
Everything,
and about you, and I'm following your, obviously trips to Gaza, every night and the reports, and as someone who has struggled with anxiety since I had after my first baby, which I think was maybe hormonal, but sort of set it off. My anxiety would get in the way. It does get in the way of being as much as I fantasize about it. I always go to the what if, or the what could happen, or oh God, that's so. I'm so surprised or jealous that your anxiety takes you to do these incredibly adventurous things. Yeah,
It's an interesting duality, and I wonder. So have you ever tried that when you're super, super focused on something, do you still feel the anxiety?
no, interestingly enough, it can take you out of your anxiety.
The more acute
Yes.
the intensity of
Absolutely.
whatever you're doing, the less anxiety you feel.
Yeah.
And for me, it helps with my ADHD as well.
Okay.
So like, the more intense the situation is, the more I am monomaniacally focused on it. Like riding a horse really fast on a ridge in Montana.
You would
Right?
enjoy it.
You have nothing else to, you have to be 100% dialed in, and then to the exclusion of everything else. You don't have to worry about your taxes. You don't have to worry about trying to apply for German citizenship, and you have no idea that the bureaucracy that is necessary for the Germans. Like all these little things in our lives that take up this mind space. When you are locked into something and it is dangerous, it actually focuses the mind wonderfully, as Samuel Johnson said.
Yeah, it's usually the anticipation that creates the, that I think creates.
They are not doing cyber they are
I
leaving.
want some of that.
The anticipation of something is what creates the anxiety, I think, for me.
No, it's interesting, like speaking of you on social media though, and as a friend, one, yes, it gives me anxiety to watch you. And it gives me anxiety for your family, and then the comments on your Instagram give me
Oh
so
my
much
gosh.
anxiety.
I don't need them. I
Well,
know we
that's
talked
really
about this.
smart. But so is that how you manage through it?
Yeah. I don't read the comments.
Okay.
So I read them the first. So I've been covering the war in Gaza since literally the second day, since it happened October 7th. I was there October 8th. And after the first couple of days, I stopped looking at the comments. And yeah, so
Okay. And then I know, but that makes me feel
some of them are
better.
really, it's coming from both
It
sides.
comes from both sides. It's not, it's just, and it's fascinating, but incredibly anxiety provoking for me, for all of my friends in news, to
Yeah.
watch you guys trying to cover this and just get,
It's been hard.
hard.
It's getting harder.
I know, okay.
Um,
Calm myself down.
Deep breath.
yeah.
Yeah. What do you, does the pressure of even
Now
thinking
I'm
about,
nervous.
I know, yes, so it does make you nervous.
Well, navigating that very
Yeah.
narrow space between the two sides makes me nervous. It's
Right.
really tough.
And I know it's a particularly loaded world event, but do you feel like in general it's getting worse on other?
The Israel,
No, not taking that as one particularly loaded cultural moment, but do you think as you covered other things, are you seeing just more and more people just unloading on you as a news person?
yeah, it's really hard to beat. Don't cry for us, but
I do
I
cry.
think
I
with
cry
the-
for the press.
yeah, I mean, I would.
Yeah.
There are a number of things that are happening concurrently. One is the retraction of the news business in general,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you saw with the LA Times. I don't know if anybody actually get the Times.
I don't get it anymore.
No, they
Yeah.
fired 115 people.
Exactly. So like a significant chunk of the newsroom went bye-bye. The Chicago Tribune and stuff are the same, and really, and Washington Post as well. There's the same traction in the network news business. It's really only the New York Times that is thriving right now, and it's very, very scary. So there's that happening as there is a war on truth, and we are really struggling with that, and it's very hard to present anything that seems objective anymore because nobody believes anything you say.
Yeah.
And so we're getting hounded, especially by the right, on that, but also by the left, which has become increasingly reactionary. And the stuff on Gaza, there's a lot of negative stuff that's happening from both sides.
Yeah.
A member of our synagogue, our community, we sent our son to a Jewish school, Valley Beth Shalom in the Valley, and it's like, how can you dare show up at school? Do you have no spine for what you've been, the anti-Israel stuff you've been saying? How dare you? I mean, it's people in your own community. Anyway, so it's become very uncomfortable. But still, I think it's an important role that we play as journalists.
No, it's very
and I'm
important.
proud to continue to try to play it.
Yeah, no, and I do legitimately cry because watching you guys all navigate this and seeing sort of the.
Which is why a psychedelic respite from once.
I know. Well, it is one of those things. We've talked about this a lot, but and in the context of psychedelics and sort of your family history and the surprise death of your father when you were a child, and watching what the situations that you put yourself in, both directly intensive experiences of war zones and sort of carrying the projections of the culture as someone who's in the middle of a conflict. I do worry and wonder how much of that is stuffed in your body, and whether you have become better about, as you do more psychedelics, as you do more of this deep work, whether you feel like you're actually getting below letting it out.
I think I am. I think I've become much better at it, and I think that since I started, so when I started the journey, which is such a hackneyed term, but when I started the journey of this book, I didn't set out to write a book. I just set out to try to heal me, because I was broken and needed to be fixed, and I wasn't exactly sure how I would fix myself. And then I realized that there are so many other people out there who suffer from panic, and most of them in silence, because it is the kind of mental health disorder in which people experience it alone, and then they become shut-ins because nobody wants to talk about it. And then I realized that I had a constituency of more than one. And so eventually I found ways of fixing it or working on it, which included breath work and meditation and crying. So a lot of the modalities that I tried ended up with me basically sobbing. And I realized I needed to cry a lot. I don't feel as much the need to cry anymore, which is good. It's good, but I'm sure I will.
But you're not stopping it. You're saying you've like developed the muscle and maybe cleared out the tanks.
Yeah, and when I did the psychedelic experience, I thought I would have a crying session, because I thought, I've experienced so much, I've seen so much, but I didn't cry as much as I thought. After my first trip to Gaza and Israel in October, as I was coming back and as the trip was ending, I basically cried anytime I came into physical contact with anyone. Like I'd hug someone hello and they'd be like, ah! It was so bad. But I let it out and I cried and it worked. So, hey guys, welcome.
But that's good. I'm glad you're not armoring.
No, I'm not armoring apparently.
Yeah, this is good.
So it is good. So it allowed me to experience something very different when I did go for the psychedelic experience, which was
when they stop live
Euphoria.
cast streaming this, are you going to share where you got your mushroom chocolate?
It wasn't a chocolate; they were just plain old mushrooms.
Oh, you picked them in your backyard.
They were obtained semi-illicitly by my wife. I don't know the provenance of said mushrooms, but it's crazy because you're actually eating like they're these big greenish mushrooms that are kind of this big.
Yeah.
And I did a little Mayan trinity. So I had mushrooms and dark chocolate and honey, which is the way they take it in southern Mexico. And I did a little bit of a ritual, took the mushrooms, and it's amazing how quickly they.
I want what you're having.
Yeah. And it's so easy. It really is pretty easy. And they've also become much more, now I'm not like promoting them, but they've become sort of really decriminalized since we've started talking about it. Psychedelic mushrooms, great healing for panic.
You popped in right in the right time.
Yeah, you sure did. And anxiety.
You missed the pants, pooping in the pants part of the
That's the next day.
Do any of you guys have any questions? He's tried a lot of things. Yeah.
Okay, so you did like this breath work that made you do octopus. Where did you learn that?
I had a friend from high school who was my teammate in football and lacrosse teams, and he was like sort of BMOC and really cool guy. And he actually it's in Redondo Beach, and he does sessions. It's pretty common. It's holotropic breath work, and it's very simple. It's basically 2 breaths in, 1 breath out, but through your stomach and through your mouth. So, and you keep going, and eventually, if you don't stop, and he takes you up and down. It's sort of like these dolphin, and then he sort of helps you descend, but you crescendo Bye, guys.
Bye.
And then you have a peak, and then he sort of lightly, gently brings you back down. It's really amazing. It's incredible that the body can take the mind to these places. And so one of the things that I was able to experience during that stuff, the breath work, but also psychedelics, and then later on, just without it, was to grieve. So it allowed me just a modality to be able to get this stuff out.
Did you cry a lot when you did them?
I cried all the time.
But you said you
the whole
also-
book is crying. Once I started, I'm like, oh God, I used to cry all the time. Why am I crying? Okay, I'm just gonna let it go. And that's one of the things that Elise taught me through her podcast, because she introduced me to another psychiatrist Ellen Vora, who also wrote a book, who so incredibly said that, crying is like the cheapest, best medicine we have.
And what's the
We
name
don't
of that
use it.
person?
Her name's
Ellen
Ellen Vora. She wrote a book called The Anatomy of Anxiety.
Oh.
It's a good book.
Oh, you read
It's
it.
wonderful. Yeah.
I gotta read that. Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like, I feel like Ellen talks about this and other sort of therapists in this space, but our instinct, or what we're conditioned to do when we start crying, is to like take tissue and just like stop it.
Well, and that's what shrinks do. Here, let me give you a tissue.
Stop,
Uh-huh.
rather than just like, so and I think within psychedelic communities too, there's like, yes, you can have a tissue, you don't have to be, but just like to let yourself, I try and do this, I don't know if you do, but if I feel it coming, I do whatever I can to not touch my face. To not even sort of like signal to myself that I need to stop.
The physical touching of the face is an expression of shame in some ways, right? It's like wiping away the tears, cover them up the face, don't see me, don't watch me cry. There's a lot of that we do.
Do you talk about how especially men are afraid to cry? Is that in there?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about me being afraid to cry. Yes. Like I called it the well of grief. I was so afraid of falling and spiraling into the well of grief and never being able to claw my way out that I refused to go in there at all. And so it did happen. Like I did spiral into it a few times. But I needed to. That's where I needed to be. And so I did learn to not cover my face, and I learned to let it out, and not just to boo-hoo, but to be like, ah! And to scream and shout and to really like rend my clothes and
Make it big.
make it big.
Yeah, I mean, besides sort of the fact that you were frequently as school shootings or all of these traumatic events, being present with people who are having truly the worst days of their lives, and being proximate to that. I can't remember, but when your dad, did you not cry when your dad died?
I did cry.
You did.
Cried, but I was 12. My father was killed in a plane crash, and I was 12. And I cried, and then I had a really good time. All of my favorite people in the world were at the house all the time. We're from the East Coast, so anybody ever had a Sloppy Joe, New Jersey? Yeah. So they're really good, and I was getting really chunky and enjoying it. Everybody was plying me with food, and there was football and like playing, and everybody I loved was there, except for my dad. And so then I went into this weird, period of the in between, and then there would be these bouts of grief every few months for the next several years, peppered with periods of significant self-destruction. And yeah, so but after that, I never wanted to go back there again. So I didn't grieve. I just didn't.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think so many men obviously are.
Why
and
are
women
you,
cut off their feelings.
Why do you want a German citizenship?
It's such a good question. First, for work, for me, it's easier to get into some countries with German citizenship. And it's always good to have a backup plan, Also, I don't know. What if my kids want to go to school there? They have 529s. They're okay. I don't know. It's turning out to be much more of a hassle than I expected. They're real sticklers.
Oh.
And anybody try? You got German citizenship?
I'm German.
Yeah, you're German.
Oh,
So to get it is very difficult to apply.
It's not like if you're like
But you are
America.
Jewish,
I am Jewish.
and that should help.
And it's not the issue of getting it. For me, it's the issue of actually filling out the 25 forms
Okay.
and having them translated by a certified translator And that kind of bureaucracy
Yeah.
gives me hives. It's not their fault. I just can't deal with it. It's very hard for
You
me.
can hire a lawyer to do it.
Yeah.
I hired a lawyer. I
Really?
paid the lawyer
So?
already, but you have to fill the stuff
Yeah,
in.
my husband.
They end up
They don't
presenting it.
know it, yeah.
What I need is an assistant.
I can't delegate.
I
I'm
know.
such a control freak.
Anyway, but the bottom line at the end of this book is that I don't have the answers. I have things that I know helped me. And what I didn't want to do in this book was be preachy. Like the guy who's got all the answers for you. No, I don't. I have some things that helped me. Not all of them helped. Some of them helped, but they all sort of led me to a place which I'm definitely much better than I was when I started out writing a book.
Yeah.
Your kids have anxiety?
Terrible anxiety. Yeah, really bad. It's genetic.
Is it?
And I think it's cultural.
Intergenerational, ancestral. But I think even the recognition of like, oh, I don't manage things well and I have to pay attention to this is really important hygiene
Yeah.
that many of us like go until you break.
And naming it for kids. I mean, the fact that my kids know that they have anxiety. We didn't know what to call it when I was growing up.
Do they see you cry?
They have seen me cry. Yeah. I don't try to hide it.
I mean,
think
I'm a person who thinks that that's good. My husband, I have a theory about men. It's that the reason they have those night tremors is because he's marching along being in such control and he won't let himself feel. And that's when, you're most vulnerable. You wake up in the night. That's like when did you say more men have the night tremors or is it gender
that's
neutral?
anecdotal, but I would say from my experience, yes.
So what did your wife do if you and your children are anxious at the same
My
time?
wife is the worst. She's like
It's a
the
family
most
issue.
anxious. Yeah,
Is
no,
she?
yeah, she's super anxious.
Are you guys anxious about the same things, same topics?
No, not exactly. I don't know. I think all of us are anxious about, many of the same things.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not, what's wrong with you?
Exactly, and that's what it is. It
Yeah.
really is part of the human condition. It's just how we are, and it's actually, I really do think that it's a strength.
Isn't that part of I'm reading this book a couple books on fear, but like the part of the brain that's just like automatic, like we're just automatic to be fear, but our more complicated brain was developed much, much later. It's only been around for 50,000 years instead of, much, much further. So it just takes, we're just kind of, like you said, born and raised to.
And so our frontal cortex
Yeah,
is the rational part of our brain.
exactly.
What happens is whenever we're in trouble, it cedes control
Yeah.
to our hippocampus and the amygdala, which are the reptilian brain, as they're known, the old brains, which just handle fear and reaction.
Yeah.
So
My question is like, being fearful, creativity and innovation can't really come from being fear and, so why hasn't that part of our brain, like why haven't we been able to overcome anxiety better? It seems like it's getting worse rather than getting better. It just seems like because we've just been under stress and things are happening at a faster pace that I know the brain changes very, very slowly, but just why do you think it's getting worse? I guess my question is. Never.
Or is it just talked about and accepted more? Like
Mm-hmm.
my daughter's friends who are 15 and 16, they say, "Oh, are you feeling some anxiety?" They talk like therapists. I mean, they went through the pandemic. I think it's more all right to have it, and there's less denial.
I think it's probably a combination of both. I certainly think, and this is in the book too, one of the things that I started to do was talking about and admitting, conceding to people that I have anxiety and specifically panic attacks. And when I told a producer I was working with, we were in the car, we're driving back from Phoenix during the pandemic, and they'd just done a story about the first injection of the Pfizer vaccine. It's a big story, and I knew the story cold, and it was my last full on sweating through my underwear panic attack. And I was like, Lisa, she's driving the whole way for most of the way. I got panic attacks. She's like, okay. Like, no. I have big panic attacks on air live. She's like, I'm sorry. It was not the emotion. I'm like, come on. And that's how young people are like, oh, my sister has it. We all have it. And she's like, that's okay, Matt. I'm like, no, but this is supposed to be a big revelation. You're supposed to be shocked. And so they handle it differently, and it is much more accepted. And, my daughter's 15 and a half, and she talks about it all the time, and she names it. I am feeling
Yes,
anxious
exactly.
right now.
And I see that different than my other kids. I think the pandemic, something with the age and this.
Yeah. And there is more input, and there is so much more input too. Social media makes people more anxious. The culture makes people more anxious. There is so much more, we're are drinking the stuff through a fire hose. And I think it does make our culture much more nervous.
But you were saying
much more
she's
anxious.
right too, so it's like a marriage.
Well, I think there's both more recognition of it and awareness of it, and I think that there are more sources that are
Like the
creating
social media
and
on top of it.
magnifying the anxiety that we're all probably predisposed to have. Would you say?
Yeah.
I mean, you're an expert in this.
I'm not an expert. I know we've kept everyone late. I just want to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, if anybody needs to leave.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think it's similar to sort of autism spectrum disorder, any of these where part of the increase in diagnoses is just awareness, and suddenly you're like, oh yeah, that's my uncle and my cousin, and
But again, so evolutionary psychology for me, and I keep coming back to it, but it really was a source. No, and I'm someone who's always been interested in history. So knowing how we were really informs how we are. And it's very instructive, right? So anxiety was literally the best invention that the great apes ever came up with. Fear was amazing. Like, okay, so if we get scared sooner, okay, there's a lion on the edge of the savannah there, and let me get this straight. So like if I get scared sooner, I don't have to sprint away with full fear and maybe get eaten. So I could just walk away by knowing that that lion poses a threat, and I don't have to almost get killed and waste all those calories. Oh, that's awesome. And so like apes and then great apes and then humans honed this idea of fear. Being able to be scared sooner was like the best, was like, forget fire and the wheel. Fear was the best thing we ever created. The ability to anticipate potential danger. And so we just fine-tuned that until it became, as the Jews say, mishigas, craziness,
no,
right? It became like, then it's overwhelming.
But building on what you sort of how you opened it and thinking about, yes, like big massive changes are so slow, but our brains are rewiring constantly, remodeling all the time. And you think about, similarly, my grandparents, one left Germany, one left Poland in the 30s. You think about sort of that hyperventilation or hypervigilance and the epigenetics that we all have in this room at some point, regardless, depending on where we came from in the globe, more recently or less recently in our ancestral lines. So I think you think about that, then you think about what it is to be alive today, even looking at your Instagram, getting a shot of cortisol. It has to be informing our anxiety. I mean, it has to be changing our brains too.
What's interesting is it doesn't make us more accustomed to it. It seems to make us more sensitive to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when those neurons fire, they're stronger than some of the other neurons that might counter them. Relaxation, I'm wondering.
I don't specifically know the neurological mechanisms by which that works.
Yeah, I don't either.
But I don't know. It just seems that we are more sensitive to it. Maybe that's a really good thing, by the way, that we haven't become completely inured to this input, that we still care and it still affects us in that way. It shows that we've retained this humanity.
Are you, so like everyone is anxious in some level, some are more anxious than others. Are you bitter towards people who are less anxious? Like, you just chill and live life and you're just like, that's.
Are you that person?
I would say I'm not an anxious person. I personally have never had a panic attack, so I may or may not be. But
No, so I don't feel. Come in. I never felt any. No, I don't feel bitter towards anyone really. I'm not like. No, I never.
to me, like I genuinely don't
Right, it would-
understand.
you
Like,
would-
I'm just like, why? What are you freaking out about? I'm like, it's chill to me, but like, I've seen friends that be anxious. I'm just like, I don't see the thought pattern how you got from point A to point Z, and then you're freaking out between. And I'm just like, oh, it's
I looked at it from a different point of view. I thought that the people like you are the anomalies.
mm,
I'm like, how does that work? That's so interesting. I think there are probably more people who have some level of anxiety,
Right.
of like clinical anxiety issues than the people who do not. And I just find it interesting. And I honestly, I really do think that it's been a source of strength for me.
Yeah.
Are you gonna write another book?
I'm thinking about writing another book, which I will talk to you about, but not about anxiety. I think I'm like, what?
About what?
I can't tell you right now, but I'm thinking about it. It may not happen.
Is this your first book?
It's my second book.
What's the first one?
The first book was called The Boys in the Cave. It was about the rescue of the
Oh,
soccer team from the cave in Thailand.
Oh, that
Back
was.
in
Oh,
2018.
I remember
Is that the
that.
one you wrote in 1 month?
Yes,
Yeah.
Did you interview Elon Musk though?
Yeah.
I tried. He wasn't interested.
I'm so surprised.
Yeah.
I had a question. I mean, I can't wait to buy the book. I haven't read it. I think you come out as the bravest because you shared your story. People feel less alone, and you stood on top of it. In addition, you use psychedelics to get there and the crying. My question is, what made you decide, like, did you never take like a benzo or an antidepressant? Did you only say, I'm doing this, I'm doing it my way, like Frank Sinatra?
He's, as you'll read, he tries everything.
Yeah. I was
Oh,
on.
so it's like a secret.
Yeah, no, it was on paroxetine, Seroxat. Pretty old school antidepressant for many years, almost 20 years. It didn't
Oh.
really work. It worked.
Well, they don't work after a while either.
It evened me out. It just didn't ever work for panic. And it took me years to figure out that I even had panic, right? So who was saying that they didn't, yeah. Or you didn't know that you had a panic attack. You didn't know what it was, hyperventilation in the middle of the night. So it was like many years, 13 years, I'd had a full-on panic attack, and I always called it nerves thereafter. And I didn't know how to name it. I didn't know what it was until a long time afterwards. And so it took me a while to even know that this was panic.
But you never took a benzo.
So I took many benzos.
what's a
And-
benzo? What's a
Benzodiazepine, like
Xanax? So
Valium.
Because those are very addictive.
they are very
And
addictive.
they
So I
can cause
love
depression.
Xanax.
Oh!
Xanax is my thing.
It's like the sexiest one. They always put it in the movies. That name.
I mean,
Xanax.
It's
Very
just-
addicting though.
it's great. And that was the problem, right? If I took enough to really kill a panic attack, I would be so sleepy and like lethargic. And I tried beta blockers, which inhibit your heart from beating too fast, which is one of the most common physical sensations associated with panic.
I know people who take those before they have to speak,
Well, that's exactly what I do, right? So
right
that's,
before you do your stand up.
yeah, but it didn't work. It also made me kind of lethargic. There are flutists take beta blockers as well. Classical musicians, because they have to use their fingers, and if your fingers are trembling, that's not great for music. So they're very commonly taken. Yeah. I tried prazosin, which is anti-seizure medication. I literally tried. You have no idea. I was there.
I can't wait for you to experience the full list.
Yeah. So there was a lot that I tried and
Because I thought you were just a crusader for psilocybin, but you did the regular
That's at
stuff.
the end
first.
of the book.
Oh,
There's a
Okay,
journey.
wait.
ahead of
There's
you.
a journey. We took a journey.
Yeah, you did.
Anyway, so there's a lot that I tried, and all of it helps a little bit. Some of it more than others.
I read the book and loved it. I really did. And then, but I liked at the end how you summed it up by saying there is not one. You know, we're all searching for that. You know, when you go up in for surgery and they inject you with that, sort of like how you said you feel on. Oh,
Ketamine, I think.
yeah. And it's maybe propofol.
Yeah, it's
or whatever.
propofol.
And and it's like you're going into this. Okay, why can't I feel like this forever?
Exactly.
I wake enough long enough to enjoy it. But I like the fact that you had that you suggested so many different ways, because I don't think there's one way. Like, the
Some people have to
meditation and
find, exactly.
I think
And there's studies that show that now ketamine is related to opioids and it can be addictive.
It's
Yeah.
way less
Yeah.
addictive. And it can be really powerful for depression. Yes, some people can get into trouble with ketamine,
But only
it's
some people.
typically, yeah, it's not nearly as
Well,
addictive.
that's
You know,
very
it's really weird.
But he had
Ketamine?
taken
Ketamine addicts are
so much ketamine. What he did is he anesthetized himself. So it doesn't tend to have the toxicity,
Yeah.
but like he was in water. And so the amount that he had taken was not what he was prescribed for his.
And he had taken it past the time that he was.
Well, he's
Didn't
clearly had his own supply.
Yes.
And I can't remember, it's like
Well, he had an addictive
200
personality too, so
times,
it's not
200
like.
times the dose. But what he did is he knocked himself unconscious and drowned.
Who is this?
Matthew Perry.
Oh, the actor.
No. But that it was terribly tragic, but it's not that he had an effect from the ketamine, even at that really high dose. It
Is this
happens.
going live? Okay, I won't say something.
I was actually just gonna say maybe we should.
Yeah, we should.
relax.
Yeah.
I did a one.
Okay.
Did you-
Oh my god.
But we can